where he said, you've got doing the basics right versus sexy banking. Also a specific order there. So there's various ways of looking at, what is that challenge now in transformation? Which direction do we go? Can we start with you, Olaf? You need a microphone for that.
Thank you. Yes, it's working? Yeah. I think there are quite a few challenges, but one of the things that I notice in many organizations is there has to be a really deep understanding. What do you want to achieve? And if I focus on an agile transformation, obviously you really have to know what do we want to achieve? What does agile really mean? And it's another way of thinking, it's another way of working, it's about individuals in the interactions. And what one of the main challenges often is that higher management has not only to support it, but really understand it. And in my experience, that's already a big challenge, because how can you understand what agile working in a Scrum team really is if you've never done it? So that's actually one of the points that I see, and maybe Krista can answer that a little bit already from your perspective. How can you really understand what agile working means, what working in a team means, if you are just in a management position and just haven't experienced it yourself?
Well, with Krista being in that management position, I'm curious to hear that response.
Well, yeah, I'm also SAFe certified, etc. So maybe I think we are getting into a management layer that is actually used to working in that. So I think many of, at least most of my colleagues in the management board of Knab have worked in agile teams in one way or the other. And you do need to understand it. And so if you are going from waterfall to agile, it's very tempting to then go full agile SAFe, which might even be worse than waterfall. But yeah, you have to understand what it means. Yeah, so I understand that. Not sure whether it's the biggest dilemma of banking currently, but it is one because in terms of organization efficiency, because you can really ruin your organization if you're not making it right. So either choose agile or don't. But all those halfway in betweens, that is actually killing speed very fast. Yeah.
And given the importance of agile, and I know, Olaf, you're not a supervisor, but we've touched on that topic before. Is that something that a regulator could play a more prominent role in, or perhaps even should play a more prominent role in, given the importance of the banking sector to the economy?
What I think particularly is that I'm not a supervisor myself, like you said, but my colleagues, supervisors, they have to really understand the banking sector. And if the banking sector and the insurance and pension funds and all the supervised institutions are moving rapidly, also the supervisor should have a deep understanding of what it means. And it should not ask for project plans and progress reporting like we did 10, 20 years ago, but should really be in depth in how are we working today and how is this evolving to be a good supervisor as well. It's not only just we have the law in our hand and all the regulations and we have our red pencil to put what is wrong in your organization and you have to improve on that. Now it's really understanding how supervised institutions are working to be a good supervisor. And in my opinion, but that's not really, I think, not all my colleagues subscribe to that vision, we should be even more like not really coach, but really a sparring partner also of supervised institutions. But that's not really the idea of the central bank as a whole, but that's my personal note to this.
Now, if we can go over to Fons. Fons, we heard the comment that, and we read it also, and we discussed it in the prep calls that we had, is that in some organizations, definitely in banking, we see that there is a lack of comprehension at top management level when it comes to transformation projects. Now, you've been training executive teams all over the world for decades. Is that something that you have come across, and have you always come across that, and what would be your recommendations to tackle those challenges?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, obviously, if you have real knowledge, you don't become a CEO. So that's especially in the Netherlands. But what I miss is, if I can build on what I was just saying, is that organizational change, which is part of transformation, is enriching yourself with the opposite, rather than replacing yourself with the opposite. And what I see a lot in boards, that everything we do now is wrong, And that's why we need to go the other way. It's very Anglo-Saxon. You kill the old and you go for the new, and it's not working. It gives a lot of resistance to change. And by the way, it's fundamental transformation if you can, as a leader, say, hey, we were a push culture and we need to become a pull culture. Impossible. The question is, what can we do with our push that makes us understand our clients better to become a pull culture? In other words, enrich yourself with the opposite. And building on that, any value disconnected from its opposite leads to a pathology. And that is also true for transformation processes. A long answer to, in the mindset of very many executives, that's not there. And it's not fair to say where I am, because very often I'm invited because they got it. And then you do that kind of stuff. But I hope that's helpful. Enriching yourself with the opposite is what makes transformation work. And for those things that were really bad, okay, you kill it. Yeah. And I have also something to say, yeah, what not, about compliance. Compliance is awful, and it's predicted. You know, there is a guy who wrote 2 articles in Harvard Business Review with the same title, and the title is How Can We Fundamentally Transform Organizations into Innovative Organizations? And he starts with saying that in the 800 companies he looked at, it started all with an incubator culture. 1 or 2 people with a brilliant idea, but it led to a leadership crisis. Then you need the family culture, because you need more direction by leadership, with the risk that it goes into a crisis of autonomy. Then you need the guided missile culture, task-oriented, client-oriented, and it leads to a crisis of control. And why I'm saying that, because then you need the Eiffel Tower culture, which is compliance, structure, follow the rules, and he's predicting, because he saw that amongst 800 companies, it will lead to a crisis of red tape. We are close to that. People are so sick and tired of all these stupid rules, only 80%, there are some. So what can we do to reconcile that so that we can combine compliance with flexibility to the client? And I have some anecdotes, but I've talked enough.
So we've heard mindset 3 times now, actually, in all 3 of your presentations. When you look at the type of skills that the banks are developing among their staff and among their project teams, they quite often lack the soft skills, and you see that it's very much hard skill focused. But since the awareness is there of the importance of mindset, are there any activities within the organization, Krista, that you can share on working on that side of skill development of staff?
Well, I'm a bit scared to answer that, because then I'm bound to use the word values, which is maybe not. But yes, it's very important, because and it's very difficult at the same time, because on the one hand we are saying that we need a different skill set, and on the other hand it's just like, okay, deliver now. So that's. It's very hard to make the time for the soft skill developments and really get people out of their comfort zone to grow as a person, while you also want them to deliver code or deliver features, right? So in that sense, I think especially, I think from a cultural perspective, what I've already said, we have 28 nationalities, we have different types of blood types, also in what you say now. Like we have like one of the first employees is still part of Knab. So we have a group that is there since 12 years, there's a group that's there since 5 years, and there's a group that has been hired in the last 4 years. Like with that's also 3 different blood types, and so we have the ones that actually like the Eiffel Tower better than the cowboys. And how to bring that together, you can only do that by soft skill development, by communication, by making sure that you have the same set of why are we here, and that is more than we're just like we're a bank and this is our customer base. It's about joint experiences and having that language to communicate along.
All right.
Yeah.
Olaf, yes.
Yes, I would like to add with an example, which is a dilemma actually, because I thought of an example like 15 years ago. I was a project manager before my time at the Dutch Central Bank, and I was invited to be a project manager of a project, and they asked me, Olaf, are you more of a result-oriented, result-driven person, or are you a people person? What are you? I was not really prepared for the question, but my answer was, well, I think we can get the best results if I care good for my team and for my people. And if I now in mind the talk of Fons, I think that's the dilemma, how we can reconcile with the best people you can get the best results. So that's the reconciliation of the dilemma, I think.
Now, if we can go back to Fons, I've got a question for you, Fons, based on a few things that came by. Let me just get my notes here. At the start of your presentation, you were talking about the American literature, and you were talking about the MBA. And point taken on both counts. What you do notice, though, these days, is that banks still seem very hung up on getting those people with an MBA degree and getting those people who come from the American business schools. You know, you've done your leadership program at Cornell, and you've done your strategy program at Yale School of Management. They're still looking for it. Obviously, that's not where they should be looking for it. So how would you go about it if you would have to advise? I put you in a room with a banker now and say, you know, come up with a plan to create a successful, say, foundation for him to start transformation. What would you recommend that he goes and look for in his people?
I have nothing against MBAs, obviously, because I have one. But, you know, you need to kill the afternoon with some challenging statements. Yep. MBAs are wonderful. You know, I have something against Apple because they're successful. I have something against MBAs because they're successful. So don't worry about that. Yeah. But what I would start with is with what are the values and purpose to which you attract those people. And it doesn't matter what education they have. Yeah, you need some of. But I would start with, and there was a furniture maker in Europe that needed 300,000 new jobs in the coming 3 years. And they said, could you measure the values of our incumbent? Because what we have found is that people leave within 1 or 2 years because they don't match our organization. I said, yeah, we can we can measure the values and behaviors of the applicant, and we can make an analysis of your organizational values. And they said, oh, great, then if the delta is too big, we don't hire them. He said, no, you need to measure a third thing, namely how willing and able are people to reconcile the dilemma between the two. So my answer to you is, first, recruit people value-based, and then look at the skills that is easily measurable, what type of school they went to, et cetera, et cetera. Values are a bit more tricky, but especially those who don't serve your values, but can reconcile your values. So if this organization is very consensus-driven, if you have an individualist who is decisive, that's the type of person you want, but not at the cost of consensus. And there are ways of measuring what we call intercultural competence, the competence to deal with opposites. Yep. I wonder what Krista has to say about this.
Well, I studied history. So in that sense, so I have a bachelor in history, and then I did a master of science in business administration. So especially in the early years of my career, I was hired because of my master of science in business. But basically, for my feeling, I never learned anything there. I'm really focusing everything on my history, because that's where you learn about where you come from dictates where you go unless you make an active choice to change it. That's where you learn about time and place in everything. So don't trust everything the internet says, because it has been written by someone with a specific viewpoint. And if you take that into a company and really know that, okay, a developer will say something because he's a developer and he knows this but doesn't know that. Someone from compliance will say something because he or she knows that and has that task. It makes it a lot easier to align all those stakeholders and all those views. So in that sense, yeah, if you are looking for MBA students, you will get an MBA culture. If that's not what you want, look broader. And then you come to what Fons is saying. Yeah.
And when you get them all together, you've got the interesting cultural mix of 28 among 500.
Yes.
Yes, okay, excellent. So Olaf, how would you set out on a journey for transformation? What would you say are the 3 foundations that you need in place before you get started to ensure success?
For a successful transformation, well, that's a good question. Well, I already stated it's all about the people, about individuals and interactions. And earlier, I think Krista already said that in an organization, when you're in the process of a transformation, it's for the greater good, in my words. So some people may be disappointed, and I appreciate that. At the same time, I think that if you look at people and all their capabilities, people are so versatile. People, motivated people, can do so many things. So be really careful before you discard any people. You say, this is what we are. We are a bunch of people in an organization working together, and people can change, people can grow, if there is the right atmosphere to grow. And I'm really convinced, deeply, that people can do great things if there are servant leaders, which give them the opportunity to grow. And then sometimes maybe you can decide, well, we have done some work together and now our path diverge. That's possible, but not because we're laying off people because we don't want them anymore, but because we have invested in people, if we invest in each other, and people can grow, and if really our path will change, well, that's a possibility, but not because of the organization decides to do so, but because, well, things change in an organization. That's always possible. I'm not sure if I already answered your question, but I think that one of the components of a good transformation is to really focus on the people and how you work together. That's the foundation of it all.
I agree. And I also heard you mention the servant leadership. Now, I remember, Fons, you said recently that servant leadership is actually the only leadership method that works, in your opinion. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, because it's one of the few leadership models that works in every parent. If the definition, like Greenleaf says, enabling others to perform better rather than you. It's one of the few leadership models that are not, let's say, infected by cultural bias, is not infected by bipolarity. And you know, the icons, as I was saying in my presentation, are people that were servant leaders. So there's a lot of qualitative evidence that it works. And if you interview people about, you know, what do you need as a leader, then you see that servant leadership very often is the answer to that. By the way, I would like to add, it's about people, but it's especially about leadership. Practice what you preach, etc., etc. It's tremendously important. But if there are better ideas than servant leadership, I would love it to hear it. But I'm worried, if you look at the world, more and more dictators are revoted. And it looks like the world is not at its best at the moment.
No, I agree. I agree.
But, you know, and you see the results of it. It's war, it's people in jail, it's, you know, let's try some other models that work pretty well. And it's not soft. I mean, servant leaders fire people, but will help them for a new job. And say, listen, you don't fit us, don't worry. Many don't fit us. I'll help you with a new job. But it's not a soft type of a skill. Yeah. I wonder what Krista would say.
You wonder a lot.
Oh, Krista,
well,
do tell.
I mean, I think I'm reflecting back to actually a discussion I had a couple of weeks ago with a coach that I sometimes speak to, and it's about kind versus nice. Yeah, so you can be very nice, but then you're also maybe not telling the truth, and you're actually trying to not harm someone's feelings, or but then you're actually talking over what needs to be said. And being kind is also giving the feedback that is needed and making sure that you do that in a respectful way. And I think that is one of the main things that's important. Because if we try to be nice all the time, then nothing will change, and people will also not understand what is going wrong.
May I add as an example? Yeah? You get it back. No, there is a Professor De Bruyne in Belgium, a professor, and he did research on how to do this. By the way, it's known in a system called synectics, that anybody can be criticized under two conditions. You have to start by saying two good things about the person and the idea, and then formulate your criticism. How can I help you overcome? And it worked. We tried it in our own little company. It works fantastic. In the beginning, it's a bit like dancing. You know, you have the numbers on the floor. Say, what is this? That's why I never came beyond lesson 2. But it becomes second nature. So if you want to criticize people, first say 2 good things about what that person has to say, and then formulate your criticism. How can I help you overcome the lack of budget, like in banks, type of thing. I don't know if it's helpful, but it's a nice afternoon. Krista.
Just pay attention at the drinks if he starts with nice things about you.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Krista. So that leaves me with my next dilemma, and that is, the questions and drinks. That's what we've got to deal with now. And I've decided to fix that in the following manner. The 3 of us, well, the 4 of us, we've just spoken about, the different angles we can take in transformation projects, the critical success factors, how to go about planning for a transformation, and what is important in terms of leadership skills, leadership styles, and your people. We've got a room full here of executives and of senior managers. So what I would like you to do is to talk to the person next to you and come up with a question that we can ask for our panel. And I'll give you 1 minute to do that, and then we'll take 2-3 questions from the room, please.
So something we find very interesting is the cultural differences between the older generations and Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And leadership currently is probably more millennial Gen X versus execution is now more Gen Z, right? And you talk about servant leadership, but we find that the culture of Gen Z is more obviously what's in it for me, how do I get enriched, I will do this as long as it serves my purpose, not as opposed to the organization staying the cause, buying into the vision and sticking to it until it's achieved. How do you bridge that between that execution layer, which is a very different mindset in my view these days to what we're used to?
First of all, I agree in principle. Obviously, there are all kinds of exceptions. You can't say Z is always about execution and what have you. But in general, I think good leadership is to take advantage of what they bring in the foreground or background. It's always a foreground background. It's a bit like Z also would be very blessed that they do execution within a vision, right? So for me, the role of leadership across generations is a bit like across cultures. It's how can you connect the talents and the focus and the basic principles to the different type of generations. And it's not an easy one, but since I'm at an age that I don't want too many people in my office, we do it with the work with interns. And they are very young, like 22, 23, 24, which for me is very young. I love it. They have a complete different mindset. They also love it that I'm around to help them in another way. So in general, the diversity between generations is a big challenge, but it's also a big challenge that can lead to wonderful results if as a leader you understand that they come from different foregrounds and backgrounds. But all the values and basic attitudes is in every human being. It's just to unevoke without doing it at the cost of other stuff, right? It's again a long answer. I hope I make sense. Yeah.
And now you're curious what Krista has to say about that, right?
Well, I have an answer on anything. If it's true, that's something else. But I always have an opinion. So I think also it's also about not being afraid of losing people. And so it's also as an employer not wanting people to stay 5, 6, 7 or 50 years, but really say, okay, you have something to bring, I need something, and it's fine if we part ways in 1.5 years. Because I think one of the top things in risk management is always key man risk. And now we have people leaving in 1.5 years, and then it's also not good. So I think that it can also be very rewarding to bring people in for their specialty, for their drive, for their energy, and then again say goodbye. And of course you need sometimes the backboners that keep a team going. But I don't mind people leaving after 2 years when the fit is no longer there, because they've learned something, and in those 2 years they've brought that learning to the company. and then they go out to different pastures. And especially within Knab, where we don't have the traditional management upward cycle because we have a very flat organization. Yeah, that means that you have to say goodbye to people, and that's fine. And you just make sure that you organize for that.
Olaf?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add? Okay. Next question.
But what gives you hope about the future, if anything? You know, what gives you hope that we can move in a positive direction and for the future?
Well, what gives hope, I think it's what Fons and Krista already said, is there's tremendous value in the generations, and not only in cultural diversity, but also in the diversity of generations. It's the Google research is clear. The better teams are the more diverse teams. That's common knowledge now, I think, which was not common knowledge like 10, 20 years ago. So that makes me positive for the future. If the new generations, Gen Z and further generations, they bring new things to the table, which I think will help us also cope with the uncertainty and the problems of these days and of the future. That's one of the things that I would say.
Yeah, I think if you sort of watch the news, you get pessimistic, but then again, if you then hear all the stories behind it, there's also a lot of optimism, right? So not sure whether on the banking forum we should discuss the state of the world in itself and then get out depressed. I think there is still in every generation, in every group of people, the will and the loyalty and the vision to grow and learn. It's just on a different focus maybe, and I think that only can bring us back to or further along to different viewpoints and visions. And if we just work together, that's the main part. World peace.
Yeah. First of all, I fully agree. It's a tough world, and the young generation could help us out because they're much better informed, I think, than we at that age. That's one. Be careful with fake news and so. What I hope is also a bit more self-reflection in the Western world, as if everything is done by the others. And there are things in the Western world. I was not long ago, a month ago, in the US, and it frightens me as well, what is happening there. The polarization, but also the type of life, the health of people. It worries me. So some self-reflection in the West could be helpful as well, rather than just saying all the shit comes from the famous areas in the world. We need to learn ourselves as well. I hope that adds to the discussion, because it's sometimes we're a bit blind ourselves. Yeah.
Now, hopefully what can also add a little bit to hope for the future is the yellow banner that you may have seen in this room and in the other room. That is one of our new initiatives, the Wisselbank World Happiness Summit. I put on there, happy customers plus happy employees make a happy bank. It can either sound like a cliche or logical, but it's something that we often forget. Where it came from is, I did a master's degree in 2014-15 when I took a sabbatical in positive psychology. And positive psychology is not just being happy all the time or thinking positive all the time. It's it's also not fixing problems. Positive psychology looks at what is good and how do we make it fantastic, how do we make it phenomenal. So a lot of the banks, a lot of the organizations have worked hard on their customer experience, on their internal processes. But how can you go from there to the next level of happiness? Happy customers don't go anywhere. In terms of employee retention, happy employees statistically don't go anywhere. They stay with you. So for anyone who is interested, on the 20th of March next year is the official United Nations World Happiness Day, hence that date. And we will have here, in this very room, the World Happiness Summit. With that said, I want to thank our panel, because if I ask for a show of hands, who is ready for drinks? That's what I thought. Fons, Krista, Olaf, thank you very much.